They say a question opened the village as dawn painted the hills. What is wealth that returns tomorrow but costs today? Some whispered a paradox, and the elders leaned in as if the words were seeds, and the seeds would root in thirsty soil. The hush broke when an offer came, and the first answer was given. It is told that a traveler arrived bearing a leather-bound ledger and a smooth silver coin the size of a palm, and with him a promise of abundance for the asking. The coin glinted like a small sun, and the ledger's pages were blank but for a single, careful ink line that could stretch into many. The villagers' eyes found the coin, and the coin found their longing. The village had houses that mended and fields that hummed. They were not poor in the way of hunger, but they were poor in the way of possibility. For years, the same rhythms had kept them safe, but dreams had grown like vines along old fences, and vines ask for more than soil alone. When the travelers spoke of a season of plenty, those vines leaned hungry toward the light. An elder named Mara took the coin first, promising to sow new seed, to fix the granary, to buy wood beyond what they could gather, and in return she signed the ledger with a careful hand. The ledger accepted her ink like a mouth does water, and a small line unfurled into a larger promise that evening. Everyone cheered, hopeful as spring. The cheer rippled through the alleys, and the ledger's line waited quietly for time to answer. That season the fields were generous beyond memory. Grain rose tall, and granaries filled faster than they could count, seeming to prove the ledger's truth. With each success the ledger was opened again, and more promises were written. Roofs rebuilt, apprentices paid for distant craft, feasts held that lasted long into night. The village learned the taste of plenty, and abundance wrote its own invitation to want more. As seasons turned, the ledger's lines multiplied like knots on a rope, and each knot asked for a coin that would come tomorrow, yet felt ordinary when wrung out among neighbors. New houses rose, apprentices traveled to learn distant arts, and children wore cloth the village had never seen. The ledger's promises were the engine of change. But with every rope of knots, the village measured its future with today's hand, and the rope grew heavier at each end. The traveler taught them a simple rule: pay a little now, and much will be returned later, and the margin seemed small when measured beside newfound comfort. Yet the ledger's margins were not only numbers, they were days borrowed from hands yet unborn, and rains yet to fall, and those days accumulated like unseen dust. The dust gathered until chores took longer, and little hands worked more hours to sweep it away. Some said the ledger had creases now, like an old map whose borders had been marked one too many times, and others folded their hands and wondered if comfort had 1,000 small taxes. Families who once shared labor for bread now counted separate coins and kept private ledgers of their own, as if the ledger had taught them to measure one another instead of helping. Trust loosened like rope frayed by repeated strain, and the traveler watched with a quiet smile. Then came a season when storms battered the hills and a sickness took livestock. The fields that had promised so much now whispered thinly. The ledger, patient as a judge, sent its ink demands with the same calm steadiness as the tide, unbothered by wind or fever. Men and women found themselves scrambling, not for growth now, but for the maintenance of what they had gained, and the ledger's line did not care. In the smoke-stung evening, when coins were fewer and the ledger's calls grew louder, the traveler unrolled a thin brass chain and offered terms that sounded reasonable but sat like a cold ring against their wrists. He said, "Attach this to your names, and we will take only what the ledger says. Pay in labor, pay in harvest, pay in seasons. They fastened the chain willingly, imagining it as a clasp for a promise, not a bind for a life, and the chain settled heavy and silent upon their future. A child named Leaf watched elders wrestle in the dim hours and asked simply, "Why must we give our days to a book?" His question landed like a pebble in still water, and the ripples found ears that had grown accustomed to answering with duty. The ledger's ink did not speak back, but the question set a new, small fire among those who had been quietly weary. When confronted, the traveler offered a final covenant: leave the ledger and keep all you made, or keep the ledger and promise what is not yet yours. His voice was honeyed, and his eyes were cool stone, and the choice felt like deciding between a warm bed and a clear path through brambles. Many hesitated because the ledger had already become how they measured worth. Councils met by the well and in dark kitchens. Some argued for a clean parting, others for caution, and a third said they should negotiate new terms, as if the ledger would be reasonable. Old friendships threatened to fold because livelihoods were baked into promises, and the ledger's lines gnawed at the edges of community. The village could not agree because each choice would cost someone dearly in time, reputation, or the ability to dream. Leaf slipped from the meetings and walked to the hill where the old clock tower, silent for years, kept its stones, believing that time itself might have an answer. He watched the sun cross the same sky his grandfather had watched and saw how the day gave itself evenly to all things, not favoring one promise over another. In that evenness, he found courage. The village had traded the steady rhythm of days for the ledger's uneven claim. Leaf returned with a handful of neighbors and a single, clear idea. They would balance what they owed with what they could truly give, not what fear or habit claimed. They proposed to the traveler a slow return, labor in repair for a season, shared harvests for another, and an end to adding new lines upon lines. The traveler frowned as the village chose its pace, and for the first time the ledger's ink felt exposed to light. They worked through a year of honest toil, mending roofs, sharing seed, nursing sick flocks, and teaching apprentices what could be learned at home, valuing skill over the traveler's costly promises. Each task repaid a line in the ledger, and each honest day was like rubbing a smear of dust from a forgotten mirror, revealing faces that had been obscured by worry. Slowly, the ledger's ink faded in meaning as the village's measure returned to hands and hours, not only to numbers. As months passed, the traveler grew impatient and offered harsher terms, but the village had learned to listen to time rather than flinch at the ledger's ink. They refused to exchange future summers for present ease and instead proposed a final account. They would repay what they could without stealing days from their children. The traveler left with the ledger under his arm and a slow, unreadable expression, for he had met a truth he could not buy. The brass links that had seemed so inevitable were removed not in a single clink, but through countless small acts: shared bread, mended tools, a regained habit of saving time instead of spending it carelessly. It is told that the first chain fell from a wrist the morning a child was taught to mend a shoe and felt pride instead of fear. Pride broke a link no ledger ever could. Freedom returned in small increments and in the slow strengthening of communal habit. They kept a new book, not of debt, but of agreements to share time and resources, and its pages were full of plans for workshops, seed banks, and days set aside for learning and rest. The new ledger did not promise more than they could give. Instead, it recorded the village's renewed vows to balance need with time and to guard the quiet currency of added days and skills. The traveler's ledger gathered dust in the edge of a trunk, a relic of a lesson learned. In the evening, elders gathered and told the story of the village that had borrowed beyond its means, and how they reclaimed their days not by finding more coins, but by valuing the hours that could not be bought. The parable concluded, "Wealth is not merely the sum of what you hold today, but the sum of days you have the freedom to use tomorrow." And the village learned that time is the truest form of wealth. Let this close the tale and leave you with steps to carry forward. Measure debt in days, not just coins. Guard your future hours, and build wealth that buys freedom, not chains.